Hey guys, welcome back to the Laid Back Homestead. I'm Crystal and today we are back in the kitchen. I have 3 recipes, if you could call it that, for preserving my tomatoes. Now, if you remember in my tomato talk video, as my fruit is coming in, we core and score them and put them in the freezer until I have time to process them. Where I live now, my pantry is really small. It's like a micro pantry. It basically only fits my kids' snacks. So it's not really feasible or possible for me to do a whole lot of canning at this time. My next house, we've already designed it. My pantry will be huge. So that won't be an issue moving forward. But for this season, I am still in the situation where I need to be able to freeze whatever I am putting up. So the 3 main ways that I am preserving my tomatoes this year is marinara sauce, homemade ketchup, and homemade barbecue sauce. Now, I've been making the marinara sauce for years, and you'll see in this footage, I don't really even want to call it a recipe. It's kind of just like kitchen sink. Everything goes in it, whatever I have on hand. But for the ketchup and the barbecue sauce, these 2 recipes were new to me this year, so I will follow a recipe and I will leave that linked below, both of them, if that's something you want to try. So as you can see here, we are full up on tomatoes and peppers. So the first recipe we're going to start with is the homemade ketchup. So the first part of the process is thawing out all of the tomatoes that you're going to use. For each of my recipes, I am thawing out the same amount, which is just close to 40 pounds. And this process does typically take me overnight, so I'll set the bag out the night before I want to start this process. So once the tomatoes are defrosted, you simply just slip them out of their skin, as you can see here, and drop them in your slow cooker. This is by far my favorite way of skinning my tomatoes. I typically will let my tomatoes simmer overnight as well. So these have been simmering all night long with the lid off. It is a little messy, but I'm trying to cook out as much of the water as possible. Soon I will come in with my immersion blender or stick blender, and I will go ahead and get this mixed up, and then I'll be able to really tell exactly how watery my sauce is. And from there, I will continue to cook it until it thickens to where I like it. This first batch is going to be homemade ketchup that will become barbecue sauce. Well, not all of it. Some of it I will put up as ketchup, but the rest I want to turn it into barbecue sauce. So just gotta keep cooking. So once the tomato level has dropped in the slow cooker a few inches, I will come in with my immersion blender and blend it up, as you can see here. And you can see how much it's shrunk at this point after blending it, and it is thickened up nicely. And at this point I realized I was supposed to cook the tomatoes down with some onion, so I went ahead and threw in some diced onion per the recipe and let them cook for a little while, and then stick blended them into the tomato sauce as well. Okay, so I went ahead and moved my tomato and onion puree out of the crock pot. You could leave it in there and continue to do this, but I needed to free up the crock pot for something else that I'm making. So I went ahead and moved it to my big soup pot. And now we're going to add in all of our other ingredients, our spices and our vinegar. So because I am making such a large batch of this, I actually needed a little over 4.5 cups of apple cider vinegar, 1 3/4 cup of brown sugar. I know it sounds like a lot, but again, I'm making 7 times the size recipe as originally called for. So there's that. Now it does call for fine sea salt. And for this size, I'm doing 4 tablespoons to start. I technically needed a little bit more than that per my calculator, but we're going to start here. And another thing to note, this particular recipe called for whole seasonings and putting them in a cheesecloth and dropping that in the middle and letting it simmer. I don't have my cheesecloth. I can't find it. So I'm not using really whole seasonings. I'm going to add in the same spices that it calls for in the recipe, but I'm going in with them ground and I'm not measuring them. I'm going to sprinkle and then adjust to taste. So some allspice, I'm just going to put a little bit of everything that calls for. Ground cloves, calls for whole cloves, but like I said, I don't have that luxury. Little bit of cinnamon. And I have celery seed, but again, I don't want to have to be fishing that out, so I'm just going to do a sprinkle of celery salt. Another reason I didn't put the full salt load. Now this, it does call for some bay leaves, so I'm going to throw in a handful of those. Mix this first so I can just let my bay leaves simmer on top. Now, the recipe says to let it cook for another 8 hours with the lid off to let it cook down. Now, of course, that's a lot easier in your slow cooker, but I went ahead and reserved my stove for this process today. Once you're done, if you're using whole seasonings, you would just pull out your cheesecloth. I will have to adjust to taste as I go along. Once it is to the flavoring that you like, it does say you can water bath can this recipe. So now this is just going to sit with the top off and simmer until it gets to our desired consistency. So once it cooled and I taste tested, make sure my seasonings were on point, we just went ahead and put it in its storage containers. And like I said, 2 of these were going to be reserved to make barbecue sauce and the other 2 were going into the freezer. So for my homemade marinara sauce, the process starts exactly the same. You start by taking out however many pounds of tomatoes you want to use. I used the same exact amount, 40 pounds, and into the slow cooker they go to cook overnight. So now we're at the part where these have been simmering overnight, and I went ahead and threw in some onions from my garden. I've even thrown in carrots in the past, just anything you have that you may want to add. I also went to the garden and got whole herbs to put in here. I'm using rosemary, oregano, basil, and I'm just going to leave them on top to simmer down while this continues to cook. I tend to leave my herbs whole. You can certainly immersion blend them in when you're done, or if you just want to remove them at the end of the cooking process. I've done it both ways. Both ways turn out fine. And I don't actually measure out or weigh out my herbs. I will taste test this at the end of the cooking process, and if I feel I need to add any more, I will add in some dried Italian seasoning and other things if it's necessary. And once it's cooked down, again, to the consistency that you like or you prefer your sauce, I just go ahead and immersion blend it. If it's not thick enough, you just let it continue to simmer until it gets to where you want. This is the consistency that I'm typically looking for. So once I'm done blending this, I am simply going to let this cool and put it into its storage containers, and into the freezer it goes. So today is the last recipe in the installment, and that is the barbecue sauce. So I'm going to show you what we need and then we'll get cooking. So for the barbecue sauce, we're actually going to take some of my homemade ketchup, and that's what we're converting into the barbecue sauce. I am quadrupling this recipe, so I have 8 cups roughly of homemade ketchup. You'll need garlic, yellow mustard, brown sugar, apple cider vinegar, butter, molasses, chili powder, black pepper, salt, and cayenne pepper, as well as, for me, I needed roughly 4 cups of onions. If you're not making such a large batch, you won't need that many. But like I said, I am quadrupling the recipe, so I have some to put up. Now the first step is to get your butter melted. And again, I am using a whole stick, but that's because I am making a large batch. Okay, and now that our butter is just about melted, I'm going to go ahead and throw in the onions, and you're going to cook the onions until soft. So now that we have our onions in here, we're just going to cook this down until they're soft. And I don't know if I mentioned it, but this is a Kansas City style barbecue sauce. I picked it because it's something different than what we normally buy at the store. So hopefully we like this. If you have any other barbecue sauce recipes that you use and love, please share them with me down below. All right, and now that that's soft, we're gonna go in with our garlic. It called for 3 cloves for 1 batch. So I'm not gonna go out of my way to specifically measure that out. And now we're just gonna let that cook for another minute until fragrant, and we will add in the rest of the ingredients. Well, it certainly smells good. Now I'm gonna come in with my homemade ketchup, and this is, like I said, roughly 8 cups of ketchup. And I will need, for this batch, 2 cups of brown sugar. And there's number 2. I will need 1 cup of apple cider vinegar. And I will need 1 1/3 cups of molasses, which will be 2 of these and 2. Now I will also need 8 tablespoons of mustard. I'm just going to eyeball this because I don't have as much mustard as I thought I did. 8, okay. I will also need 8 tablespoons of chili powder, which sounds like a lot, but I'm trusting the process here. Now, as far as salt and pepper goes, I'm gonna just do this to taste, and we'll probably change that up. I mean, this is just some ground black pepper. It called for coarse. I don't have coarse. We're gonna use what we have. And I will just leave these seasonings out and adjust once it's finished simmering. Now I'm going to go in with some salt. And some cayenne. So we're going to bring this to a boil and then cook it at a simmer for 10 to 15 minutes until all the flavors have melded together. It doesn't call for me to immersion blend this at the end, which would leave a very chunky barbecue sauce. I'm not sure. Is that typical of Kansas City barbecue sauces? I guess I need to do some research. I may go ahead and immersion blend it just for my family's own preference. Granted, a lot of times when I'm using barbecue sauce, we don't use it as much as a condiment as I do to cook with it. I do a lot in the slow cooker with barbecue sauce. So it's already thick. Wow. Didn't even come to a boil yet. So now that we are simmering, I am coming around occasionally and making sure it's not sticking to the bottom of this pot. This is not a non-stick pot, so I don't want it to burn. So just keep an eye on it. You don't have to babysit it too much, but try to make sure if you're using a pot where it could potentially stick and burn, I don't think you're going to want that in your barbecue sauce. Okay, so this has been simmering for about 20 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and taste it. Grab a little spoon here. That's really good. Perfect. Okay, I did some quick research and I've read that it's really not supposed to be chunky. So I'm going to go ahead and immersion blend this to get it nice and smooth before putting it up in the freezer. It also needs to finish cooling before I can put it up in the freezer. So now I've got it blended and it is nice and thick. And I cannot wait to use this. Now that the barbecue sauce is finished, I went ahead and let it cool completely and then put it into its storage containers. And I ended up with about 12 cups of barbecue sauce total. Well, guys, thanks for hanging out with me in the kitchen today. I just want to say I'm planning on using these 3 items, the ketchup, the barbecue sauce, and the marinara in future cooking videos. So if you're interested in any of that type of content, I go ahead and encourage you to subscribe because I am going to show you how I actually will cook with this, is that if you're planning on using these as condiments, I would freeze them in smaller amounts. I typically will be using the ketchup and the barbecue sauce more so in recipes. And then whatever I don't use, we will use as a condiment, the rest of that week, and just store it in the fridge. Thank you always for hanging out with me. I appreciate it. And until next time, stay blessed.